They came from the darkness between the stars, quiet, precise, and unstoppable. For hundreds of years, the galaxy had whispered their name like a warning. Every world that stood against them fell. Every empire that challenged them burned. No army, no weapon, no plea had ever slowed their rise. The Vorkon Dominion, as they were known in 1,000 dying languages, believed themselves to be the final step of civilization. They were not born of one world, but many, an ancient mix of species united by conquest, logic, and power. They called their expansion the cleansing, a polite way of describing what was really happening. Total control. In their long history, they had faced many enemies, strong ones, clever ones, desperate ones, but none had lasted. Even their most powerful opponents eventually surrendered or vanished. And now their gaze turned toward a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star. To them, Earth was nothing, a young world. Divided, emotional, and primitive, their observers had watched for years, hidden beyond the reach of human telescopes. They saw wars fought over land and faith. They saw pollution, greed, and fear. They saw a species tearing itself apart and concluded that this planet would be no challenge. So when the Dominion's high command met to discuss Earth, there was laughter in the chamber. Their leader, a creature whose voice sounded like rolling thunder, said with cold amusement, "Send a single battle group. It will be enough." And that was it. A few words decided the fate of humanity. Far away, under the warmth of the same yellow sun, life on Earth continued as usual. People worked, loved, argued, and dreamed, completely unaware that far above something vast and ancient was already moving toward them. It started small. Strange signals appeared on deep space monitors. Scientists in several countries picked them up, odd bursts of energy, repeating patterns, unnatural frequencies. At first they thought it was a mistake, or maybe a star behaving strangely. But as days passed, the signals grew clearer. Someone was coming. When the truth reached governments, panic followed. Military satellites were redirected, secret space programs suddenly went public, and the world's leaders held urgent meetings behind closed doors. For the first time in human history, every nation had one shared fear. Across news channels, debates raged. Some experts said it was just cosmic noise. Others said it was contact, real, undeniable contact. The word alien was whispered in every language. At first, the public didn't believe it. People joked online, shared memes, made videos pretending to see UFOs. But when the world's telescopes caught sight of the first object entering the solar system, a shape so large it blocked starlight for minutes at a time, no one laughed. Anymore. Governments stopped hiding the truth. The president of the Global Council appeared on every major broadcast looking pale and tired. He said only one sentence that everyone would remember forever. They are not human and they are not coming in peace. Panic turned to chaos. Some prayed. Some prepared. Others refused to believe. Military bases filled with activity. Scientists worked around the clock trying to understand what kind of ships were coming. There were thousands, each one larger than a city, each one carrying weapons far beyond anything Earth had ever built. But even in the middle of fear, something remarkable happened. Humanity started to unite. Countries that had once been enemies began to share information. Old rivalries suddenly seemed small. Engineers, coders, and mechanics from every corner of the world came together in underground bunkers and orbiting labs. They didn't have much time and they knew they couldn't win a full-scale war, but they could try to survive. The plan was simple. Build something, anything, that could stand in their way. There were debates about what to call the project. Some suggested Defender, others Hope. In the end, they chose a single word that meant everything to the people building it: resolve. It wasn't a symbol of strength. It was a symbol of willpower. As the alien fleet drew closer, Earth watched helplessly. The ships moved with terrifying grace, massive dark forms cutting through space, glowing with strange blue light. They didn't answer any transmissions. They didn't send warnings. They didn't slow down. In their own language, the Vorkon commanders discussed Earth like farmers talk about a field. They had studied humans, our art, our science, our wars. To them, humanity was fascinating but weak, emotional, divided, easy prey. They expected resistance, yes, but nothing serious. Maybe a few missiles, a few desperate radio messages begging for peace. They had no idea what was waiting for them. On Earth, construction of the Resolve continued non-stop. It was far from perfect. It wasn't sleek or beautiful like the alien ships. It was built from recycled parts, old satellites, and experimental engines that had never been tested in real combat. Every worker knew they might not live to see it fly. Every pilot who volunteered knew it was likely a one-way trip. But still, they worked. Not for glory, not for power, but for the simple, stubborn belief that their world was worth fighting for. Mothers sent their sons. Fathers sent their daughters. Scientists handed over their best inventions. Artists painted symbols on the ship's hull, sunrise, oceans, faces, and words in hundreds of languages. Messages of love, messages of hope. When asked why they kept working even when defeat seemed certain, one of the engineers said quietly, "Because even if we fall, we'll fall standing." In the final week before the invasion, something shifted in the air. People began to understand that the future of the human race might come down to a single moment. Streets were empty. Schools closed. Cities grew quiet. But the silence wasn't fear anymore, it was waiting. And then they arrived. The sky filled with strange lights. Huge shadows passed across the moon, blotting out the stars. The alien ships entered Earth's orbit, surrounding the planet like a dark crown. Every radar, every satellite, every telescope confirmed it. The invasion had begun. Broadcasts around the world showed the same image, a fleet so enormous it stretched across the horizon of space. The Dominion had sent what they thought would be more than enough to erase a world. But Earth was not ready to die. At dawn, the Resolve launched. It wasn't much to look at, a single, uneven vessel glowing faintly against the darkness. But when it rose through the atmosphere, millions watched from below, tears in their eyes. The ship was filled with volunteers, pilots, engineers, medics, people from every culture and faith. No single flag flew on its surface, just one word painted across its side: Earth. As it left the planet's shadow and entered the blackness of space, the crew could see the enemy waiting ahead, thousands of massive ships, silent and still. The stars seemed to vanish behind them. Inside the Resolve, no one spoke for a long time. There was only the sound of breathing and the hum of the engines. Every person there knew the odds. They weren't going to win, but maybe, just maybe, they could change something. Maybe they could show the universe what it meant to be human. Far away, in the control chambers of the Dominion fleet, alien commanders observed the lone ship on their screens. Their sensors confirmed it was small, laughably small. One officer turned to his superior and said in disbelief, "They sent one." The commander's voice was calm and certain. "Then this will be quick." But for the first time in their long and perfect history, the Dominion was wrong. Because what they didn't understand, what they could never understand, was that humans didn't measure strength by numbers, or weapons or technology. They measured it by heart. And as the single human ship moved toward the endless fleet, engines burning like a tiny blue flame against the dark, the story of Earth began to change forever. When the Resolve left Earth's atmosphere, people across the world held their breath. It wasn't just a ship rising into the sky. It was a piece of every human hope leaving the planet. The clouds parted around it like curtains on a stage, and for a few seconds the sunlight caught its metal surface, making it shine like a second sun. Down below, billions watched the live broadcasts. Some prayed, some cried, others simply stared in silence, realizing that humanity's entire future rested on a single vessel made from scrap and courage. The Resolve carried no nuclear warheads, no planet-destroying weapons, and no ancient alien technology. It carried something far more unpredictable: humans. And humans, as history had shown again and again, had a strange habit of surviving the impossible. Inside the ship, the crew sat strapped into their stations. Their hands trembled, but their eyes stayed forward. The captain's voice came through the speakers, calm and steady, reminding everyone why they were there. "We represent every life on Earth," he said. "We don't fight for victory. We fight so they'll remember we didn't surrender." His words hung in the air like a promise. As the Resolve reached orbit, the view outside was breathtaking. The Earth below looked peaceful. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. It was hard to believe that this beautiful world was about to be tested by something far beyond its understanding. Then, the stars disappeared. The Vorkan fleet had arrived fully now, thousands of massive ships drifting into position, forming a dark wall across the void. They moved with terrifying order, their formation flawless. Each ship glowed with cold blue light, powered by energy humans couldn't even name. The crew of the Resolve watched the enemy ships spread across their screens. No one spoke for a long time. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the engines. One of the technicians finally whispered, "There are too many." The captain didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone could see it. Back on Earth, command centers across the planet were flooded with data. Scientists analyzed the alien patterns, trying to find weaknesses. Engineers updated the Resolve systems in real time, sending code directly to its onboard computers. Everyone who could help was helping. It wasn't one country fighting anymore, it was humanity. Governments opened their networks. Hackers who once worked against each other now shared everything they knew. Languages, cultures, and flags didn't matter anymore. For the first time, the human race acted as one. In a hidden underground base somewhere in the mountains, an old scientist watched the data feed. His hands shook, but his eyes were bright. "They think we're weak," he said softly. "Let's remind them what weakness looks like when it refuses to die." The Resolve moved closer to the alien line. Every kilometer it traveled felt like a heartbeat. The crew knew the Dominion wasn't expecting resistance, let alone a direct approach. On the alien flagship, commanders observed the small human vessel. Their sensors confirmed it was unarmed, slow, and primitive. One of them laughed, a deep echoing sound that rolled through the chamber. "They dare to approach," he said. "They have courage, I will give them that." But the Dominion didn't understand courage. To them, emotion was a flaw. To humans, it was the source of everything that made life worth living. Back inside the Resolve, the first transmission from Earth came through. It was a simple message, 3 words displayed on every screen. "You are not alone." Those words hit everyone like a wave. Some smiled through tears. Others clenched their fists. For a moment, the fear faded. They weren't just a handful of people in a lonely ship. They were the voice of an entire world. The captain gave the order to activate the ship's defense field. The engines roared softly, and the vessel shuddered as power surged through its patched systems. Every bolt, every plate, every wire held its breath, and then the Dominion fired the first shot. It wasn't loud in space. There was no explosion, no sound, just a blinding flash of energy that crossed the distance in seconds. The Resolve shook violently. Lights flickered. Alarms screamed. But somehow, against all logic, the shield held. Inside, the crew stared in disbelief. The experimental defense matrix had survived a hit from a weapon that could vaporize a mountain. It wasn't perfect. The system was already overheating, but it had worked once, and that was enough. The captain's voice came again, stronger now. "Return fire!" Everyone moved at once. The Resolve had no powerful cannons, only improvised railguns made from magnetic coils and fragments of old satellites. But they fired anyway. Metal projectiles shot across the void, small and fast, so fast that one of them hit an alien ship dead center. It didn't destroy it, but it left a mark, a small, glowing scar across the ship's armor. It was the first time in history that the Dominion had been hit by something they didn't understand. The alien commander stared at the data in disbelief. "They damaged us," he said. His tone wasn't angry. It was confused. It had never happened before. He ordered the fleet to respond with full force. On Earth, millions watched the unfolding battle through transmitted visuals. When they saw the Resolve fire back, cheers erupted in every city. Strangers hugged in the streets. People waved flags, not of nations, but of Earth itself. For a brief moment, humanity forgot its divisions. But the joy didn't last long. The next wave of alien fire hit harder. The Resolve spun wildly, its hull cracking under the pressure. Sparks flew across the control room. Smoke filled the air. Still, the crew refused to stop. Engineers rerouted power. Medics treated burns with shaking hands. Every person on that ship had accepted the same truth. They might not return, but they would make their stand count. One of them managed to restore the communications line to Earth. "We're still here," he said into the mic. The signal broke, but the message went through. Those 3 words became the rallying cry across the planet. People painted them on walls, printed them on banners, and shouted them from rooftops. "We're still here." In orbit, the battle dragged on. The Resolve moved like a wounded animal. limping, broken, but still dangerous. Using data from Earth scientists, the crew began to understand something about the Dominion ships. They were too perfect. Every move was predictable, every attack logical. That was their weakness. Humans were unpredictable, emotional, irrational. They could improvise in ways no machine could predict. So the captain changed tactics. Instead of fighting directly, they started using chaos. They overloaded systems, faked power failures, and sent out random signals to confuse the enemy sensors. Each trick bought them precious seconds, and for the first time the Dominion hesitated. The alien fleet slowed its advance, recalibrating, trying to make sense of what was happening. To them, war was a formula. To humans, it was instinct. When another shot from the Resolve hit a second alien ship, damaging its engines, the unthinkable happened. One of the Dominion vessels retreated. It was only for a moment, but the effect was immediate. Across their communication channels, confusion spread. The command structure faltered. The captain of the Resolve saw the opening and smiled faintly. "They're scared," he said. "Let's give them a reason to be." By now, the ship was falling apart. Systems were failing one after another. Power was dropping. Yet no one gave up. Every time a system died, someone patched it manually. Every time a wall cracked, someone held it together with whatever they could find. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about showing that humanity could not be erased so easily. On the alien flagship, the commander finally realized what they were facing. "They are not fighting for victory," he said slowly. "They fight because they refuse to kneel." He had seen rebellions before, seen resistance, but nothing like this. These humans were willing to face an empire with a single ship. It made no sense. It defied every rule of conquest, and that was why it terrified him. Hours passed. The battle reached its end. The Resolve was barely functional, drifting silently between the stars. The Dominion fleet stopped firing. They had the power to destroy the ship completely, but they didn't. Something in them hesitated. Maybe curiosity, maybe respect. The human ship, smoking and broken, floated before them. And then, from the ship's communication system, a message was broadcast in every known frequency. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was just a voice saying, "This is Earth, we are still alive." The message traveled far, echoing through the void. It reached not only the Dominion ships, but their occupied worlds, their colonies, their enslaved species. Everywhere those words carried the same spark: hope. When the smoke cleared, the Dominion ships began to withdraw. They had expected a fleet and found only one ship. Yet that single ship had made them question everything they believed about power. Back on Earth, the people saw the alien fleet vanish into the darkness. No one knew why they left, but the reason didn't matter. Humanity had survived its first encounter with the impossible, and in that moment, every person on the planet felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: pride. They had faced the invincible and refused to break. The world didn't sleep that night. From one end of the Earth to the other, people gathered in front of screens, radios, and speakers waiting for updates. Every second felt endless. Everyone wanted to know what happened to the Resolve, the only ship that had gone to face the greatest empire in the galaxy. When the alien fleet vanished from the radar, people cheered, but the joy didn't last long. The signal from the Resolve had stopped too. The world that had finally united under one cause now waited in silence, unsure if their heroes had survived. Governments searched every frequency. Scientists scanned the sky. Nothing. Just the static hum of space. Days passed. News anchors tried to stay calm on air, but their voices cracked. Families held photos of the people who had gone aboard the Resolve, whispering prayers that somewhere out there, they were still alive. Then, on the seventh day, a faint transmission reached Earth, a single tone, followed by a voice that was barely audible. It was the captain. His words were broken and weak, but clear enough to understand. "We're coming home." For a moment, the whole planet stopped. Then everywhere, people screamed, cried, and laughed all at once. The impossible had happened. Humanity had stood against the most powerful force in the galaxy, and someone had made it back to tell the story. When the Resolve entered Earth's orbit again, it looked nothing like it had when it left. Its hull was burned, torn open in places, and most of its systems were offline. Pieces of the ship broke away as it descended through the atmosphere. It wasn't flying, it was falling with pride, Rescue teams rushed to the landing site. The ship came down in the middle of a vast desert, kicking up a storm of dust and fire. When the hatch opened, the world watched live as the first figures stepped out. Tired, covered in ash, but alive. They didn't look like heroes. They looked human, ordinary people who had carried the weight of the planet and somehow survived. Crowds gathered for miles. People cheered as the crew walked out one by one. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, just quiet tears, hugs, and the shared relief that the human race was still standing. The captain looked up at the sky, where the stars still shone faintly even in daylight, and said softly to the reporters who had gathered around, "They expected a fleet. We sent one." That sentence spread faster than light. Within hours, it was printed on every screen, every wall, every heart. It wasn't just a line, it was a symbol. The phrase became a reminder that courage didn't need numbers, and that sometimes one act of defiance could change everything. But deep beneath the celebration, there were questions. Why did the Dominion retreat? They had the power to destroy Earth easily. They didn't lose because of weapons. They left because of something else, something no one could explain. In the months that followed, scientists and military leaders worked together, studying every piece of data from the battle. The damaged systems of the Resolve held recordings, partial visuals of the alien ships, strange energy patterns, fragments of communication signals. When they decoded them, they found something shocking. The Dominion fleet had not retreated because of damage or defeat. They had retreated because of confusion. Human unpredictability had caused errors in their strategy algorithms. Every move the Resolve made, every desperate last-minute trick was something no machine or empire could understand. Their logic failed. Their structure broke. For the first time in their long history, the Dominion had met something they couldn't predict: human emotion. Still, Earth knew better than to celebrate for long. The Dominion was out there, and everyone knew they might return. World leaders met again, not in secret, but in open view of their citizens. This time there were no walls between nations, no separate military alliances. They sat at one table, facing one truth. If humanity wanted to survive in the galaxy, they needed to evolve. The space programs merged. Factories that once built cars or planes now built starship parts. Engineers redesigned everything from scratch, using the lessons learned from the Resolve. The new mission wasn't defense anymore, it was preparation. For the first time, humanity looked beyond survival. They looked toward the stars. Meanwhile, the crew of the Resolve became quiet symbols of unity. They didn't want fame or glory. Many of them returned to their families, trying to live normal lives again. But they couldn't forget what they had seen out there, the sheer scale of the Dominion's power, and the strange silence after the battle. Some of them began to speak to scientists and historians, telling their stories not as heroes but as witnesses. One crew member described the moment they thought it was all over. "We felt like dust in the wind," he said. "But then we realized, even dust can reflect light." Their words inspired a new generation. Kids who had grown up seeing war and division now dreamed of stars and unity. Humanity was changing, not just technologically, but emotionally. Far from Earth, beyond the solar system, the Dominion Council gathered again. The leaders of countless conquered worlds sat in a cold, metallic chamber, watching replay after replay of the battle with Earth. The footage showed the tiny ship, barely holding together, still firing, still moving. They couldn't understand it. Logically, the humans should have surrendered or died quietly. But they didn't, and that made the Dominion uneasy. One of the senior commanders spoke, his voice filled with a rare emotion: doubt. "They are nothing compared to us," he said. "Yet they refuse to fall. What happens when they grow?" That question spread across the room like a cold wind. For an empire built on certainty, fear was something new. They had destroyed hundreds of civilizations, but none had looked back at them and said, "We're still here." None had survived long enough to make them question themselves. The Dominion was powerful, but for the first time they were uncertain. On Earth, things began to change faster than anyone expected. What had started as fear turned into progress. Old rivalries disappeared almost overnight. Countries opened their borders to share knowledge. Factories produced parts for something bigger than any single nation, something that belonged to everyone. They called it the Earth Fleet. But it wasn't a fleet of war. It was a fleet of survival and exploration. Each new ship carried names representing human values: unity, faith, harmony, and memory. They weren't built to conquer. They were built to remind the universe that Earth had a voice. Every ship had a small piece of the original Resolve's metal welded into its core, a reminder of where it all began. But not everyone believed peace would last. There were still those who worried the Dominion would return, stronger and angrier than before. To prepare, humanity built deep space sensors, relay networks, and defense grids around the solar system. But this time they also built something else: bridges. Messages were sent out into deep space not as challenges but as greetings. "We are from Earth," one of them said. "We come not to conquer but to understand." It was a gamble, reaching out into the same darkness that had once brought destruction. But humanity had learned something important. The best way to face the unknown wasn't through fear but through courage and curiosity. Years passed. The Dominion never returned, but strange signals began to reach Earth again, not threats this time, but whispers. Other worlds, once under Dominion rule, had heard what happened. They had heard about the small blue planet that stood alone. They had heard about the ship called Resolve, and now they were rising too. Messages began flooding through the void, different languages, different symbols, all meaning the same thing: we are free. Humanity had done more than survive. They had started a chain reaction across the galaxy. Empires were beginning to crumble, not through war, but through the awakening of hope. One night, as the Earth rotated slowly beneath the stars, the captain of the Resolve stood on a quiet hillside, far from the cities. He looked up at the sky, peaceful, endless, full of stories waiting to be told. He didn't know what the future held. Maybe the Dominion would return one day. Maybe other dangers would come. But it didn't matter, because now he knew something that no one could ever take away. Humanity was no longer small. Not because of size or strength, but because of heart. When he was asked later what it felt like to face the Dominion, he didn't talk about fear or pain. He just smiled and said, "They thought we were alone. They didn't understand that when one of us stands, all of us do." And so the story of Earth spread across the stars, not as a legend of war, but as a story of unity. It reminded every world, every race, every living being that courage could come from the smallest of places, and that even in the face of the impossible, hope could be stronger than fear. The Dominion had expected a fleet. Earth had sent one. But the truth was far greater. Earth was the fleet. Every heart, every soul, every dream that refused to give up became part of it. And that was how the galaxy began to change, because one small world dared to say no, and meant it. Years had passed since the day the Resolve came home. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Cities that once fought over borders now shared skies filled with new ships. Factories worked day and night, not to build weapons, but to build dreams. Humanity had stepped into the stars with new eyes. But peace never lasts forever. At first, the signals were faint, strange static that slipped through the outer defense lines. Scientists thought it might be echoes from deep space, but soon the truth became clear. The Dominion was returning. This time, they weren't coming to test humanity. They were coming to erase the memory of their own failure. When the news broke, the planet didn't panic the way it once had. People didn't hide. They didn't argue. Instead, they prepared. The world had learned what unity meant, and no one wanted to lose it again. Across continents, lights glowed through the night as engineers worked without rest. New ships were ready, better, faster, stronger. The Resolve had been rebuilt too. Not polished, not perfect, but ready. It had become more than a ship. It was a symbol of Earth itself, scarred, stubborn, and alive. The captain of the Resolve, older now, stood before his crew. He didn't give orders. He simply said, "We did it once. We can do it again." That was all anyone needed to hear. As the new Earth fleet rose into orbit, people gathered around the world to watch. Children pointed to the sky. Old men and women who had lived through the first invasion held each other's hands. This time they were not sending one ship. They were sending many, but each one carried the same heart. Beyond the solar system, in the cold space between stars, the Dominion fleet moved like a storm. Their ships were larger now, their weapons brighter, their commanders furious. They had learned from their last encounter with Earth and were ready to crush it. Completely. But what they still didn't understand was that humanity had changed too. When the first Dominion scout ships arrived near Jupiter, they found something unexpected. The humans didn't hide behind their planet. They came forward, waiting. The Resolve led the line, followed by ships built by nations that once had been rivals. The fleet's formation wasn't perfect. It wobbled, shifted, and moved like something alive. To the Dominion, it looked chaotic. To humans, it looked right. The alien commander studied the readings. "They've built more ships," he said. "But their technology is still primitive." Another officer replied, "Primitive or not, they are not afraid." The commander hesitated, remembering the reports from years ago. That hesitation was all humanity needed. The battle that followed was silent to the human ear, but it shook the void. Bright flashes of light crossed the blackness like storms caught in slow motion. On the Resolve, systems screamed under pressure. The crew moved as one. Every second counted. Earth scientists, watching from command centers below, guided the fleet through encrypted channels. Every maneuver, every plan was a collaboration of millions of minds working together. This wasn't a war of domination anymore. It was a test of spirit. As the fight raged near Jupiter's orbit, something strange began to happen. The Dominion ships, so perfect, so organized, started to break formation. Their systems glitched again, confused by the unpredictability of human tactics. The Resolve had been modified to carry a new kind of signal weapon, designed not to destroy but to disrupt. Instead of brute force, it used confusion. It flooded enemy sensors with random noise, human voices, laughter, music, even the sound of waves crashing on Earth's shores. For the Dominion, it was chaos. Their logic-based communication networks couldn't process it. Their targeting systems froze. Some ships stopped firing altogether, their crews overwhelmed by the strange, emotional noise echoing through their systems. For humans, it was the most beautiful sound imaginable, the sound of home, fighting back. But the Dominion wasn't done yet. They unleashed their strongest weapon, a gravitational pulse that bent light and crushed everything in its path. It moved like an invisible wave sweeping through the battlefield. Ships were thrown off course. Systems went dark. For a moment, it seemed the entire human fleet would be torn apart. On Earth, the watching world went silent again. Families held their breath, remembering how close they'd come to extinction before. Then, through the static, one faint voice came over the broadcast. It was someone aboard the Resolve. The words were calm, steady, still standing. The message spread across every frequency, repeated by every ship, every base, every person. Still standing. Those two words became the heartbeat of the battle. The human fleet pulled together. Damaged ships realigned. Crews refused to abandon their stations. Every person fought not out of hate, but out of love for the world they came from. And slowly, against all odds, the Dominion wave weakened. The gravitational pulse collapsed under its own power. For the first time in history, an empire that had ruled for thousands of years was forced to retreat a second time. Back on the Dominion flagship, the commander stared at the battle reports. Every chart, every projection, every model told the same story. This shouldn't be possible. He looked at the image of Earth on his screen, a small blue world glowing softly in the dark. "They are not powerful," he said quietly. "They are persistent." His second-in-command asked, "Shall we continue the assault?" The commander closed his eyes. He had spent his life believing in strength and control, but now he saw something different. "No," he said. "Not today." The order to withdraw was given. When the last alien ship vanished beyond Saturn's rings, the human fleet didn't cheer. They were too exhausted, too aware of what it had cost. Many ships were damaged. Some were gone, but the line had held. The Resolve, battered once again, drifted silently for a moment before turning toward home. Inside, the crew sat quietly, watching the stars. No one spoke until one of them said softly, "Do you think they'll come back?" The captain looked out at the endless blackness. "Maybe," he said, "but next time they won't find the same Earth." When the fleet returned, the planet welcomed them not with fireworks or parades, but with open arms. The people understood that what mattered wasn't victory, it was survival with dignity. The battle became known as the Quiet Void, because there had been no sound in space, no explosions, only the silent determination of two sides staring at each other across the dark. Students learned about it in schools. Artists painted it. Poets wrote about the courage that could be born from fear. The world had found a new way to measure greatness, not by what it could destroy, but by what it could endure. Years later, when historians looked back on that time, they realized something important. The Dominion had not been defeated by force, but by understanding. They had built an empire on the belief that emotion was weakness. But humanity had shown that emotion, love, fear, hope, was the strongest power of all. The resolve became a museum, floating in orbit around Earth. Visitors walked through its halls, touching the walls that had once faced the impossible. They read the words painted across its hull. Earth sent one. Children pressed their hands against the glass and whispered, still standing, and somewhere far away, on worlds that had once lived in fear of the Dominion. Those same words began to spread. The Dominion, for all its strength, started to crumble from within. The idea that a small, chaotic species could stand against them planted seeds of doubt across their empire. People they had conquered began to question their masters. Every rebellion began with the same whisper. If Earth can fight, so can we. No matter how far the Dominion traveled, they couldn't silence that voice. Back on Earth, humanity didn't grow arrogant. They didn't build monuments to war. Instead, they built listening stations, science vessels, and peace missions. The lesson had been learned. The universe was vast, and survival wasn't about domination. It was about connection. Still, the stars were no longer a place of fear. One night, as the captain of the Resolve stood on a quiet platform overlooking the repaired fleet, a reporter asked him, "Do you think we've won?" He smiled, his face lined with age and memories. "There are no winners in the dark," he said. "Only those who refuse to disappear." The reporter nodded and turned off the recorder, leaving the man alone with the stars. For a long moment, he watched the horizon glow faintly blue, the same color that had guided him home so many times, and he whispered to himself, still standing. The wind carried the words away, but they didn't vanish. They became part of the planet's story. A reminder passed from one generation to the next, and so, in the quiet that followed, the galaxy began to change again. Not through violence or fear, but through understanding. The Battle of the Quiet Void wasn't remembered for destruction. It was remembered as the moment when one small world proved that even silence can speak louder than power. The Dominion had expected a fleet of warships. What they found, instead, was a fleet of hearts, and that made all the difference. When the stars went silent after the battle, the world waited. For days there were no new signals, no signs of movement from the Dominion fleet. It was as if the universe had taken a deep breath and didn't know how to exhale. The Resolve drifted near Earth, its hull burned and broken in places. Inside, the crew worked in silence, checking systems, repairing what they could. They were tired beyond words. Some hadn't slept for days, but no one wanted to rest. They were afraid that if they closed their eyes, the war would start again. Down on Earth, people looked up at the sky every night. For the first time, the stars didn't feel distant. They felt alive, connected to every heartbeat on the planet. The news networks didn't talk about victory or defeat. They talked about survival, unity, and the price that had been paid. The world mourned those who didn't return. Families placed candles by windows facing the night sky, as if hoping the light would reach their loved ones drifting among the stars. But even in grief, there was pride. Humanity had done what no one believed possible. They had faced an empire that ruled half the galaxy, and they were still standing. In the months that followed, something unexpected began to happen. Strange transmissions started to arrive at Earth's deep space stations. They weren't hostile or coded for battle. They were messages, voices from distant worlds. At first, the scientists thought it might be a trick, maybe remnants of Dominion signals. But soon they realized the truth. The messages came from planets the Dominion had once ruled. The voices were filled with disbelief and hope. They said things like, "Is it true? Did your world fight them and live? We heard the Dominion lost. Is Earth real? Teach us how to stand." It was then that humanity understood how much their fight had meant. They hadn't just protected themselves, they had lit a fire across the stars. On one of those distant worlds, miners whispered stories about a blue planet that had challenged the Empire. On another, teachers told children about a single ship called the Resolve that faced 1,000 enemies and didn't back down. Everywhere, the same words spread in different tongues. They expected a fleet. Earth sent one. The phrase became a symbol of courage. Earth's leaders held a meeting in a new hall built on neutral ground, a place once scarred by war, now shining with glass and sunlight. There were no flags inside, only a circular table. Every seat was equal. The discussion was simple but heavy. What should humanity do now? Some said they should stay silent and rebuild. Others said they should reach out to the worlds that were calling for help. In the end, the choice was clear. The Earth that had survived by unity could not turn its back on others who wanted the same freedom. A message was sent across the stars. To those who still live under fear, you are not alone. We will help if we can. We do not seek to rule. We only seek peace. It wasn't a message of war. It was a message of hope. Months turned into years. The Dominion didn't return. No fleets appeared in the sky. But reports began to come in, one after another, of rebellions rising within the Empire's own borders. Entire colonies refused to send tribute. Armies laid down their weapons. Workers on factory worlds stopped production, shouting the same words the humans had once used. Still standing. The Dominion tried to suppress the uprisings, but fear no longer worked. The myth of their invincibility was gone. The Empire had ruled through control and perfection, but now imperfection, emotion, chaos, courage had become the most powerful force in the galaxy. On Earth, life changed slowly. The world began to rebuild, not as separate nations but as one people with many voices. Old military bases became research centers. Soldiers who once fought learned to teach and build. Children grew up dreaming not of battles, but of stars, wondering what other worlds might be waiting out there. The Resolve, once a broken ship, was placed in orbit as a monument. People visited it in virtual tours. They walked through its narrow halls and read messages left by the crew. One message was carved into the wall beside the control deck. For all who choose to stand, even when standing seems impossible. That single sentence became part of school books, speeches, even songs. The galaxy, however, wasn't done with humanity yet. One quiet evening, the deep space sensors detected something moving beyond Pluto. It wasn't a fleet this time, it was a single ship. It didn't attack. It didn't send warnings. It just waited. After careful analysis, Earth sent a communication signal, a peaceful one. The reply came minutes later in a calm, measured voice. We wish to speak. It was Dominion, but not the kind that once came with war. The visitors who arrived weeks later weren't soldiers. They were envoys. They came without weapons, without threats. They wanted to understand how the humans had done it, how a species so young, so small, had defeated them not once, but twice. The meeting took place aboard a neutral space station orbiting Mars. The human representatives were cautious but respectful. The Dominion envoys were quiet, their mechanical voices softened by something that almost sounded like uncertainty. One of them said, "You changed us. We were built to conquer, not to question. Now our own kind are asking what purpose strength serves without meaning." The humans didn't gloat. They didn't demand surrender. Instead, one of them said simply, "We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we had something worth losing." The room went silent after that. Even the Dominion couldn't find words to answer. Over time, these small meetings grew into something bigger. Trade routes reopened. Information was shared. Dominion scientists, who once viewed emotion as a weakness, began studying the human mind, trying to understand what gave it so much resilience. And humans learned too, about technology, about the vast history of the galaxy, about civilizations that had fallen long before the Dominion rose. It wasn't friendship at first. It was curiosity. But curiosity, like courage, spreads quickly. Meanwhile, across the stars, the legend of Earth continued to grow. Some worlds began calling it the Silent Planet, the one that spoke through actions rather than words. Others called it the Spark, because its light had started something no one could stop. And somewhere deep within Dominion space, their supreme leader, who had once ordered Earth's destruction, looked out at the stars and realized that the empire he ruled was no longer what it had been. He saw his own people questioning, hoping, dreaming, things he had spent his life trying to suppress. For the first time, he felt something he didn't understand. It wasn't fear. It was respect. Back on Earth, as peace settled in, the captain of the Resolve walked through the ship one last time before it was turned into a museum. The corridors were quiet now. The engines, once roaring, were still. He touched the walls gently, remembering every moment, the fear, the laughter, the impossible choices. He whispered to himself, maybe this is what victory really means. Not ending a war, but making sure no one has to fight another one. He left a small metal badge on the main console, a symbol of the crew who had risked everything. And as he stepped out, he looked down at Earth glowing blue beneath him. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was alive, united, and free. In time, the phrase "still standing" became the motto of a new alliance. Not an empire, not a government, but a network of free worlds that chose cooperation over control. They didn't build armies. They built bridges, ways to talk, to trade, to learn. And whenever a new planet joined the alliance, its people were told the same story. Once there was a small blue world. No one believed it could survive. But when the storm came, it stood. And because it stood, we all do. The Dominion was no longer the monster it had been. Its fleets were smaller, its leaders humbler. They had learned that fear only lasts until someone dares to face it. And now they too began to rebuild, not as conquerors, but as equals. Some of their younger generations even visited Earth, walking among humans, studying their ways, listening to their music, learning what made them strong in their fragility. For the first time in recorded galactic history, peace wasn't just a word. It was a reality people could feel. Years passed, and the galaxy grew quieter, calmer, kinder. But the story of the Resolve was never forgotten. It was retold in countless forms, in songs, plays, paintings, even virtual recreations. It became more than history. It became a reminder of what courage looks like when everything seems lost. In every version of the story, one moment was always the same, that final message that echoed through the chaos. Still standing, and so the silence after fire became a kind of peace, and not empty but full of promise. The stars no longer belonged to empires or conquerors. They belonged to those who believed in something greater than power, those who believed in the simple, unshakable will to keep going, no matter how impossible it seemed. And whenever someone, somewhere felt small or helpless, they would look up at the night sky, find that tiny blue star, and remember what it meant. They expected a fleet. Earth sent one. Years had passed since the Great Silence. The Dominion Empire was gone, not with a final battle, but with a quiet fading, like a storm that ran out of strength. Across the galaxy, new stars of freedom began to shine. Worlds that had once lived in fear of orders from above now governed themselves. Planets that had never dared to speak before now spoke proudly in open councils. The sound of war was replaced by the hum of rebuilding. Cities rising again, families reunited, trade routes reopened, and skies clear of warships. And at the heart of it all, far from the center of the galaxy, floated a small blue planet, Earth. It had become more than a home to one species. It had become a symbol. The world that had stood when everyone thought it would fall. The Resolve still orbited the planet, shining faintly under the sunlight. It was old now, its metal worn and darkened by time, but no one dared take it apart. It was more than a ship, it was history made real. Every day, visitors arrived to see it. People from other worlds came too, beings with strange skin, multiple eyes, or translucent forms all traveling to that single relic of courage. They would stand inside the ship's narrow hallways, touch the cold walls and whisper the same words, still standing. On Earth itself, things were different now. There were no more separate governments fighting for control. Instead, there was one council, made up of voices from every region, every culture, and even a few from other planets. They didn't always agree, but they listened. And that was enough. Education became the heart of everything. Children grew up not just learning about math or science, but about empathy, teamwork, and how to build peace even when disagreements came. When people looked at the night sky now, they didn't feel small. They felt connected. Far away, in what used to be the Dominion's capital, a different kind of gathering took place. The halls that once echoed with orders of conquest were now filled with discussion and reflection. The last surviving commanders of the Old Dominion sat with human ambassadors. There was no anger, no revenge, just quiet understanding. One of the former Dominion leaders, his voice slow and thoughtful, said, "We built an empire out of fear because we thought that was the only way to survive. But fear built walls, not strength. You showed us something we never understood, that real power doesn't come from control, but from connection." The human envoy smiled softly and replied, "We learned that too, the hard way. Over the next decades, Earth helped build a network of peace stations across the galaxy. These stations weren't military outposts. They were meeting places like floating cities, where different species could come together to trade, share ideas, or simply talk. Each station carried a name that meant hope in a different language. One was called Asha, another Leora, another Numa, and one, the most visited of all, was named Resolve Station. In the center of that station stood a statue, not of a soldier, not of a king, but of a group of people holding hands, their faces turned upward toward the stars. Below it, an inscription read, "Every empire crumbled before them. They expected a fleet. Earth sent one." Stories began to travel faster than light. On distant planets where children once feared the word Earth, now they dreamed of visiting it. They learned about how humans were not the oldest race, nor the most powerful, nor the most intelligent. But they were something rarer, a species that could lose everything and still keep their hope alive. Some alien historians began calling this age the Era of Light. They wrote that it began not with an invention or a discovery, but with a single act of defiance, a world that refused to kneel. Back on Earth, generations passed. The captain of the Resolve grew old, his hair silver, his body slower, but his spirit never dimmed. He often walked along the coastline near his home, where the sea met the horizon. He liked to sit on the rocks and listen to the waves. When young people recognized him, they would ask the same question. What was it like, facing the Dominion? He would always pause, smile faintly, and say, "It wasn't about facing them. It was about facing ourselves. We didn't fight to destroy, we fought to remember who we were." Then he'd look up at the stars and whisper, "Still standing." Those who heard him never forgot it. Eventually, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was broadcast across hundreds of worlds. There were no grand speeches, no military displays, just silence, music, and stories. On Resolve Station, a moment of quiet was held. Ships dimmed their lights. Entire cities stopped for 1 minute. And across that endless expanse of stars, one phrase echoed again and again, "Still standing." It became not just Earth's motto, but a galactic one. Decades later, when historians gathered to write the story of how everything had changed, they struggled to explain how one small world had reshaped the galaxy. Some said it was technology. Others said it was luck. But most agreed it was something deeper, a combination of human emotion, unity, and stubbornness that no machine could measure. The historian who wrote the final record put it simply, Earth did not win by power. It won by remembering that every life, no matter how small, has meaning. The Dominion's old territory slowly turned into the Free Systems Union, a loose group of independent planets that cooperated under a shared code, a code written together by humans and former Dominion thinkers. It said, "No world shall rule another through fear. Every voice, no matter how quiet, has worth. Strength exists to protect, not to dominate. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding." That code became the foundation of a new galactic order. As centuries passed, New ships began to travel further than any before, beyond the edge of the known galaxy, into the silent stretches of space where even starlight seemed to fade. On the hulls of many of those ships were the same words painted in white: Earth Fleet. But these ships weren't built for war. They carried explorers, scientists, teachers, and artists. They carried stories, not weapons. Whenever they landed on a new world, they planted two things: a small beacon and a message written in simple language. We come in peace. We are from the world that still stands. And even though the old captain was long gone, people still told his story. On Earth, children would lie under the night sky listening to their parents say, "Once there was a time when everyone thought we were too small, too weak, too late. But we stood up. And because of that, the stars remember us." The children would stare up at the stars, their eyes wide, their hearts full of dreams, and whisper the same promise to themselves: "We'll keep standing." As ages passed, even the names of empires faded from memory. But the story of that one battle, the day when Earth sent one, never disappeared. It became a legend told in every language, a story that didn't belong to just one world but to all of them. And somewhere in the endless darkness, drifting quietly through the stars, the resolve still floated. The lights inside had long gone out, but every so often sunlight would catch on its hull, making it shimmer for a few brief moments. Travelers who passed by would stop and watch, their ships turning their lights off out of respect. Some even said they could still hear something faint through the static, a heartbeat, a whisper, a message from long ago. Still standing. Maybe it was only imagination. Maybe it was real, but it didn't matter. The meaning was the same. The galaxy moved on, but the lesson remained, that courage isn't measured by size, power, or weapons. It's measured by the will to rise again when everything seems lost. And so, as stars lived and died, as new civilizations were born and old ones turned to dust, one truth stayed unshaken, that a single act of bravery can echo through eternity. They had expected a fleet, vast, terrifying, and full of destruction. But Earth had sent something far greater. It had sent one ship, one world, one unbreakable spirit, and because of that, every empire that had ever thought itself eternal learned the same lesson in the end, that no empire lasts forever. But courage does.